In Blade of Acrimony, you play as Sora, a young woman who finds a cursed sword, which is actually a fallen angel being punished, in the forest. The sword convinces her that it is a physical representation of her god, and that all the world is full of sinners, and it is her charge to make sure they get into heaven. How, you may ask? In the most literal sense. You need to kill the sinners to save them. And on that, I actually love how when you attack it says save instead of fight. Nice touch. There is a lot I can say about the combat, but many negative aspects have already been addressed by the developer as I livestreamed it, and after the fact as we both discussed certain things that worked and did not. So, I will only mention that success is still tied to trial and error. The only decent tactic, even after the positive adjustments, is figuring out if you should be counterattacking or muting the enemy as soon as you have the resources to do so. Of note, the game touches on some pretty heavy and dark themes, which do make the player feel something. Like when you kill your best friend and get 2 souls for the deed. Yep, she was preggers. But it isn't always what I think the dev wants the player to feel. I felt mortified by some of the story, but it didn't personally make me question my morals or wrestle over what had just happened. It was just there. That leads me to my main issue with the story. It suffers by being the victim of convenience. Things happen just to happen, and only to move the plot from point A to B, with no real character interactions going on. I mean, you pretty much kill everyone you interact with, and whatever dialogue beforehand is either about revenge, or trying to stop you, or cowering in fear. It makes for a flat story overall. Plus, there's no real explanation for why Alex, the sword, wants to wage war on God, or why Sora is suddenly so gung-ho on killing, even though she was a pacifist when this all began. These reasons are actually locked behind one of the several endings that you can achieve playing the game. While I love mystery and intrigue as much as the next guy, I have issues with games that hide all the exposition and a majority of their story behind endings that are somewhat convoluted to get to, or don't really give a clear resolution. The endings themselves vary wildly, and the player is given no indication which is the actual canon ending. So even after achieving all of them, you're still left with unanswered questions and confusion, but not in a good way. Also, just a note, while this is one of the bullet points on the Steam page, I don't really agree with calling this a psychological horror. Sure, there are horror elements, but the story lacks the gravity of psychological torment, especially since the main character kind of falls right into the killing easily. Holy crap. Frost Noble, the developer, is a beast when it comes to the art for this game. Not only are the tile sets almost entirely custom, but every character has custom sprites and battlers. Every single one. That's unheard of for just about any RPG, indie or mainstream. And they look pretty amazing. Frost actually reduced the price of the game, and I feel it's much more in line with what a game like this should cost now. While there are some key major issues with the story, I personally kept playing because I wanted to find out what happened to Sora and why she was acting the way she did after finding the blade. Kudos on Frost for creating an intriguing story. There is a boss, it's hidden behind one of the endings, but it is honestly one of the reasons I am, okay, spoiler alert, recommending the game. The fight is so well done and it's a lot of fun. When I was playing the game, I had both Frost Noble and a guide to help me along. But for the most part, for most of the game, enemies needed to be silenced. And even with the fixes, it could still miss and leave you at the mercy of really bad RNG. What I didn't like is, for some of the final characters, you don't silence them. One of the guys, it leads him to fully heal. It's very back and forth. So, don't spend a game telling me how to do one thing and then throw it out in the final few encounters. While I think the eating the souls to level up is a really neat mechanic, it's very easy to forget to do so. A lot of Sora's best abilities cost 50 to 100 divine points in the game, but it can take a good deal of time to accumulate what you need, even when taking and dealing damage back and forth to increase that resource. And a lot of the effects, it seems kind of lackluster for their cost. Each of the endings has an additional bonus little after credits scene. But the only way to get there is by never using an item during battles. This adds a really big artificial difficulty to the game. It's challenging at first, but it becomes really frustrating later on. Plus, I personally don't think hiding elements behind, what is effectively an achievement gate is very fair to the player. And remember that super awesome boss I talked about? As I said, it's basically hidden behind one of those endings. And unless you follow very specific conditions to get to that ending, you'll never see that awesome boss. I've made my opinions on the story pretty clear, and while there is a plot of Alex the Sword trying to overthrow God, there's no reason given in-game as to why that is. The story itself just kind of happens. Everything that happens to Sora or Alex is merely a matter of convenience and just to move the plot along. There are a lot of plot holes as well, so nothing really feels answered or resolved, even with the endings. Even with the fixes, some skills are still very RNG reliant, and it can cost you the fight if you get a single miss or screw up a turn order. And on that, more than a few fights seem to just kind of drag on, and not because of the RNG or the turns done poorly. The enemy health pools felt far too large in some areas, or maybe Sora's damage output was too low. Either way, they dragged on a bit more than they should have and affected the enjoyment of the game. The game waits far too long to give character motivation. This is one of the more key elements of a story, and should be revealed either very early in the game or about midway. You don't really discover why Sora is so easily influenced to kill until you consume 50 souls. That is pretty much right at the end of the game. And the excuse is sort of flimsy, and again, very convenient. So, in the end, is it worth attempting to overthrow the Lord our God, or should you accept your fate of being a sword for all eternity? Blade of Acrimony is a game made up of great ideas, with poor execution. It has a number of major flaws, but at the same time, it also has a lot of heart. This is a dev who has not only made a ton of custom artwork for this game, but has also incorporated a very interesting and varied world of lore as well. I mean, that said, large chunks of that lore and story are obfuscated behind the multiple endings. All said and done, I'm going to barely recommend it. I personally really want to support this dev, as they are not only fixing the current game, but using what they are learning in their next game. However, if you are the less than forgiving type, it's probably better to just pass on this one. I'm HawkZombie. Thanks for listening.